Yeah.
One of the questions that was raised at another group that I went into this week was some people are wrongly quoting the Gaia Theory as one of the reasons for the pandemic, and people were, yeah, and this was it, and
You have to explain that because I don't understand.
well, saying it's Mother Earth's way of making sorting out the fact
Telling us off.
too many people doing too many wrong things, but Laura Cox was there from the Extinction Rebellion group, and she was very quick to say it's something that they'd been discussing in the Extinction Rebellion, and that there must not be this feeling of blame, that's not the way that Mother Nature would work, that she might well fight back from the point of view of tsunamis and trying to control her temperature and everything else like that, but that she wouldn't necessarily be causing pandemics. So that it was an interesting one, especially knowing that we were going to be discussing it this week, you know. And I sort of sat up when somebody said, "Oh well, there's the Gaia Theory that she's going to do this," and I thought, "Oh my goodness me, I don't think she would be that cruel." But there you go. But that was an interesting one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a few reactions to that. I mean, first of all, there's got to be some kind of misunderstanding there, because the theory itself it explains it all in terms of physical and chemical mechanisms and biological mechanisms. And I will certainly next week talk about the idea that Gaia has a mind, consciousness. But to talk about blaming Gaia is very odd. That's kind of, you know, that's a kind of anthropomorphism that is entirely misplaced. Now, yes, I think the arisal of the pandemic can be understood in terms of Gaia theory, if you like, in various ways. I mean, it's partly a product of globalization. Partly but it's partly a product. Some people think of very misguided behavior by humans that is very misguided from an ecological point of view. You know, has it got something to do with people, you know, wanting to eat live animals and eating wild animals that should be, you know, threatened species, and you know, this is if that is the origin of it, well, you know, yeah, we are getting our comeuppance. And we are, in one way or another, we're getting our comeuppance. I mean, we, you know, and this is happening in all sorts of ways. And I think the tsunamis may be possibly part of it. Climate change obviously is, you know, that the way that we as a species are acting is bringing about reactions on the part of the planetary ecosystem that are very dangerous for us. That's not a basis for blaming anybody or anything. I mean, it's just karma, isn't it? You know, what goes around comes, or what you sow, you reap. Yes. Corona may be an example of that, but we can't be blaming Gaia. It doesn't make any sense.
I'm not at all surprised that has come up, because before I go on to an example, I was watching another video, but with this Gaia principle, it's the whole attitude of a majority of human race seems to be in externalizing someone who controls this, not taking any responsibility, and last of all, trying to avoid the mention of the consciousness word, which is a dirty word in most modern, so-called modern thinking. particularly in science. You did mention there were a lot of leading scientists who have accepted it because they've come from the left brain side, and they've realized the right brain was already there. It had intuited through the wisdom traditions the reality of things. And the left brain leading scientists who are not afraid of speaking their minds, and they're easily ostracized by the mainstream science.
Sorry, you mean a right brain scientist, you mean? You said left brain.
The scientists who have, through the left brain, arrived at the conclusion that the right brain scientists, if you can call Buddha a scientist,
Mm-hmm.
he had already arrived at that. Yeah.
Scientists of the mind, eh?
Yeah. But mainstream science still is hell-bent on denying consciousness. So I was listening to a talk about another theory that about holographic universe, or the reality as a holograph. And they were trying, there was a leading mathematician, nuclear physicist, and it was only towards the end of that discussion of the panel that consciousness was mentioned by the one philosopher who was on the panel. And they were very quick to try and poo-poo that whole thing. They would accept anything, including a spotty teenager programming the matrix-like world that we live in and are creatures like Sim City. But consciousness, again, it was like, oh, it's a nasty 4-letter word you have uttered in a very religious.
Maybe they can't spell it.
Yeah, but this is just another example, blaming Gaia, rather than thinking that Gaia is a living organism, and just like we are a living organism, we kill a lot of bacteria, not out of maliciousness, but it's just the way life is. There is no maliciousness in Gaia. It might be a living organism. It is trying to rebalance itself. But rather than accepting that it's trying to rebalance itself, it's easier to say, let's blame the pandemic on Gaia.
Well, the fundamental mistake there is thinking we're over here and Gaia is over there. We are, if Gaia is an organism, we are the cells of that organism.
Yeah.
So, the cells of the organism can't really blame the organism. They wouldn't exist without it. Yeah. Anyway, but I mean, all the everything you've been saying, the team, points to, I think, there is a split, and when we talk about the left brain, I don't want to get into kind of blaming the left brain, because that would be, but where there is, a lack of awareness of the dimension that the right brain hemisphere brings, where people are excessively the left hemisphere is excessively dominant in their thinking and their awareness in their consciousness, then there are a lot of characteristic things that brings. So one of them is ego grasping, and here we're talking a lot about ego grasping. And blame is totally based on ego grasping, isn't it? There has to be this person, this here's me, and and then there's another you over there, Gaia, which is attacking me, and I'm blaming it. You can't blame a physical phenomenon, can you? You have to blame. It has to be a person to be a subject of blame. It has to be, and you think of it that way. But Gaia isn't like that, whether it has consciousness or not, but that its behavior can be understood in terms of, I mean, it's kind of systems theory, tells us about how complex systems react to stimuli. And it's all totally based in fundamental physics and mathematics. It's not idea of some extra being in there, and consciousness separate from the physical and chemical processes that is changing those processes and making something happen that wouldn't happen otherwise. Now you can talk about, is there consciousness of Gaia? But again, this dualistic view that the conscious, which is, very clear in Descartes, he said, I consist of a mind and a body, and my mind, gets into the, if my body may be going this way, but my mind will make it go the other way. So it's like the laws of physics are not complete unto themselves, because you have to bring in something outside the physical world, this consciousness, which then can, intervene in a physical process. Now, here we're not talking about this. So that is a dualism, and it's closely connected with ego grasping, positing a separate self, which is not, outside the mind and body, controlling the mind and body, isn't it? So Buddhism says that's not the case, but that is a left brain mode of consciousness. Also, the denial of consciousness is very much associated, I think, with excessive left brain dominance. It's the right hemisphere that has the ability to notice that it's conscious. The left brain is always looking outside. There's an object that it is thinking about. It can't really look at itself. Whereas the right brain is self-aware in a way. Anyway, I'm talking too much. Other people. I hear the birds.
Yes.
It's almost. I was just thinking of, is there such a thing as the Gaia rebellion, in as much as different, different antibody, different aspects of it are fighting each other.
Yeah.
That would be more realistic to actually think about that, because my sister-in-law is going through a problem at the moment, and it's her stomach, but she's blaming outside things, and I'm thinking, who puts things in your stomach? Nobody else is putting things into your stomach. Right. You're obviously putting the wrong things into you that are affecting you. Yeah. And no matter how many times I try to say this, she goes, "Oh, well, it's not that. It's just something else that's going on from outside." And I'm thinking, yes, I can't bring that in.
Very normal. Yes,
it is. Yeah, and she's wanting to blame somebody. So rather than blaming the fact that instead of a normal breakfast, she has 4 ginger biscuits. I rest my case, my lord. Yes.
Yeah, and that's right. And I think, yes, we could think about it in terms of something like an immune system response, and things have got out of balance, and in the physiology of the planet, and when things got out of balance in the physiology of your own body, then probably if it gets serious, then probably a lot of cells are going to die in that process. So maybe autoimmune diseases and things like that, don't know, but clearly things are very out of balance. And one criticism that was made of the Gaia theory was, oh well, sometimes big changes do happen, so it's not very good at controlling and regulating itself. So there was kind of throwing doubt on the self-regulation. Well, actually, if you look at how the theory in fact works, it doesn't say that everything is kept totally constant and stable. Life isn't like that. Life is very dynamic. And so it goes through, changes, but it will remain stable for a long time. And then suddenly when the kind of something or other goes too far, then it will suddenly push the system into a different state, where the relationships between all the parts and all the organisms and so on suddenly change. So you get, in the history of the Earth, evolutionary history of the Earth, you get sudden changes to the whole ecosystem. Suddenly, like 50, 60 million years ago, we had everything was reptiles, and going along with those reptiles, there was a certain kind of flora, plants and insect life, and then quite quickly that they became extinct and were replaced by mammals. And suddenly you've got hundreds more species of mammals, you've got different ecosystem, different climate, everything changed because the system flipped into a different stable state. So actually it's not something that just keeps going, homogeneously. So I think that's what we're seeing at the moment, where we are in the middle of a state transition, is a term that's used. This complex system has a number of different stable states that it can be in, an infinite number probably. But we are flipping out of one. We've pushed things too far, too many human beings, too much industrial activity, cutting down too many trees, all of these things. We've disturbed the equilibrium of the global ecosystem to an extent where it's going to be, for a while, it's going to seem very chaotic, and then it will settle down into a new equilibrium. And we're going to go through that, and we have got in for a rough ride. And James Lovelock's one of his most recent books called A Rough Ride to the Future, and he's right.
One last thought. I don't know if I'm right, but as you mentioned, there is a rebalancing going on in Gaia and the world that we live in. But equally, I think there is also a rebalancing between the old style thinking and the new style thinking. Probably a battle between the left and the right brain. And the lesson that we are now having to learn is that these parts need to cooperate. And a lot of people are averse to the Gaia principle, mainly because it's challenging the structures that we have put into, the left brain has already put into place, which, although it's damaging, it's given certain amount of luxuries and comfort, and they don't want to let that go. At the same time, they don't want to accept the fact that that is an unsustainable model. And we have to have this balance between the left brain and the right brain. And this is the paradigm shift, that we still got this Newtonian universe that we are living in. We still haven't quite grasped or accepted the later science that has come out with things like Heisenberg and the uncertainty principle. And that,
I think quantum mechanics is much less revolutionary than Gaia theory.
And at least if we can come into that paradigm, move then into the acceptance of the Gaia principle, and that we are all part of the whole universe, is that would be a smaller step. But we are so far behind the part of humanity that still wants to cling on to the old ideas, the old so-called certainties.
I mean, it's always like that. There's always a huge amount of resistance to a new scientific theory. The more revolutionary it is, the more the more it demands a real paradigm shift, a shift in the kind of thinking rather than just the details of that thinking. And this is a very big shift. So it's not at all surprising that there's been huge resistance in the academic community. I think perhaps the academic community itself is getting a bit long in the tooth, It's getting a bit crusty and, fossilized.
I wonder if sometimes if we're a type of parasites, because there are parasites that are very good and live side by side with something that is a living entity, and live on that, like the ones that live on the side of the big whales and things. They live there, and they cling to them, and they're part of it, and they actually do some cleaning process, and they're working really well. But then there are other ones that actually are negative, and they do not very nice things. So I'm wondering, I wrote a poem, I think it was back in the 80s, that was put into print in a book called The Eternal Earth.
Oh,
and it was about the fact that Mother Earth was getting fed up of some of these things, and she was trying to shake us off,
yeah, yeah.
which
James
is why she was having those sort of things.
James Lovelock talks about that human beings as a bad cold. The Earth's got a bad cold. That's going to sneeze.
I think I've heard a scientist who accepts the Gaia principle that humans are part of the Gaia. We have just started behaving like a cancer. Cancer are just ordinary cells, part of us, but only when they go berserk that they become a cancer on the host, and that needs to be controlled, and that this is just controlled. We are part of the Gaia principle. Yes, we are an experiment that Gaia can quite easily afford to eliminate and restart the life principle, perhaps with a more improved form of intelligent creatures who would work in harmony. Who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a view on that, and I would have, if I'm going to talk about the Jana Macy talk, I will talk about that next time. I mean, I don't subscribe, and there's a lot of people, I don't know how lot, but there are certainly people out there talking about short-term, near-term human extinction. I personally don't subscribe to that idea. I think that we could do it if we had a global nuclear war. I think, which 50 years ago or 40 years ago particularly, was very much on the cards. I think if that had happened, then probably the human race would have become extinct. And James Lovelock says it wouldn't do much harm to Gaia, but I'm not even confident of that. That is one thing that we could do that would inflict real, deep ecological damage and probably bring about the extinction of all large mammals. But that's not what I think is going to happen. Unless we do that, I don't think that we will become extinct. I do think we're in for a very rough ride. There may be, 10% the number of people in 100 years' time that there are now. But in terms of human evolution, that's not a very significant event. It happens with other species, all the time. A species will not have any difficulty surviving if its numbers are reduced by 90%. If there's plenty of them, if there's 10 of them, then it might be a problem. But if there are 7,000 million people, and at the end of the century we have 700 million, doesn't mean that humanity is going to become extinct. Now that would be a catastrophe, greater than any of us can possibly imagine. That's, in my opinion, that's a worst case scenario for climate change. I think 50% is an optimistic scenario. So I don't think we're going to become extinct. But we're going to have to evolve, and I think that we can and we will. There's a very interesting thinker, eco-philosopher called Arne Naess, a Norwegian, probably the most famous, eco-philosopher. And he said, and this was back in the 1960s and 70s, I often say to people, I am an optimist for the 22nd century. And he would say, oh, you mean the 21st century? And he would say, no. Long term, I think I'm actually quite optimistic about the prospects for humanity. Because I think that the revolution in awareness that is happening now, it's too late to prevent, the climate catastrophe. Not going to happen. We're not going to prevent that. I don't think. I mean, there are ways that you could imagine that we might do that, but I think it's now it's becoming more and more implausible that is actually going to happen. So we are going to. I think we will see a catastrophic collapse of human civilization, but it will not be the end. In a way, it might be the beginning. Because this revolution in consciousness and spirituality that is happening, it's exploding. It's huge. And so even though it may be too late to prevent that catastrophe will not be the end of human history or human civilization or human evolution. But that's a very, very difficult thing to contemplate and to confront. And that's exactly what this talk that I was going to talk about next week, what it's about. So it's a challenging thing to look at.
Sorry, could I request you that at some point, can you relate this to perhaps the concept amongst Tibetan Buddhists of the tertons, the information that Guru Rinpoche has sown in time in certain people's minds, certain beings will.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, the big one is the exodus from Tibet. All the lamas who were not addressing the wider world at all. Suddenly, they're all out there, and everyone is listening to them. It's the same thing. Yeah. I was actually speaking about tertons, and I possibly mentioned, I don't know, but I came across a very interesting book about it, which I'll send the details around. It's a amazing terton story that I'll point you to. Maybe it's got some links to Rewalsa as well. Might be interested to.
Even the Dalai Lama in one of his interviews, they said what was the positive things to come out of the invasion. He said that we would have just stayed in Tibet. He said, but we left Tibet. Yes. We had to leave Tibet. It was almost like it was forced upon us.
Yes.
And by doing that, they brought Tibetan Buddhism out to the world.
So that's very interesting, and that it points to this idea that there was some kind of a deeper logic to history, which relates also to what you said about is the coronavirus? Is it I mean, whether we get into blame or not, but is it kind of a meaningful event in terms of, as it were, the destiny of humanity and the destiny of life on Earth? And I think yes, it is.
To slow down. It's forcing people to slow down. Forcing people to go back to basics, back to living with their families, back to interacting with each other in a much more meaningful way than a frivolous way, say. So it's actually making people stop and think and creating that time for them.
Yes. So you can kind of ask, what is its purpose? And then, people get into, there's big debates with Gaia about, oh no, it can't have purpose, it can't have, intention. For whatever scientific reason. I mean, Richard Dawkins thinks it's because there's only one planet, so it can't evolve by natural selection, and that's the only way anything can evolve, isn't it? Well, no. but whatever, I think it's a philosophical mistake thinking like that, because again, it comes back to thinking that the idea of a separate self, you can look at natural processes and life as purposeful, and it's make perfect sense to do that. and you can look at them as a causal system. That also makes perfect sense. And there's no conflict between the two. They're just different ways of looking at the same reality. So anything that happens, and this is what the Lojong, the mind training, is all about, isn't it? You know, it's like when you're transforming negative conditions into the path to enlightenment, whatever happens to you, you can make it purposeful, because you can see, this is the advantage of this happening to me, somebody, you know, abusing me. I can use this. And we can use the COVID-19 situation. You know, it's giving us opportunities that we didn't have. Like you say, Tina, it's giving hundreds of millions of people an opportunity to have some contemplative time, to have some quiet time, to have some time to be in nature. And many people are using it in that way. So yeah, but I think in a way it maybe is deeper. You know, there may be things in the logic of how events unfold that are more meaningful and purposeful than we can easily understand. It's a bigger story, you know, things have a deeper meaning. And this is very much what, you know, the Kala Chakra Tantra is kind of about this, you know, that this teaching coming through Tibetan Buddhism, that it says that not only is there this inner logic to the cycles of time, how events unfold, but we can, through spiritual methods, we can tune into that and understand that logic and understand how things are unfolding and why things are unfolding as they are. There is an answer to why are things happening as they are. There's an answer. Why is this pandemic happening in terms of our spiritual evolution as a species, or as a, you know, more than human community. Another Gaian phrase. Yeah, we have to stop thinking about humanity over here and the rest of the natural world over here. We should be thinking about the earth community of all living things.
Well, when someone mentioned about the Tibetans coming out of Tibet and caused by the Chinese invasion, going back, the fact that Guru Rinpoche, who was in the area that of Revolsur and the other areas, and then went into Tibet to plant the seed of Buddhism.
Yes.
And then Tibet closed itself for a period of time to any external influences, giving it that seed chance to grow.
Yeah, so the whole Tibet itself is a giant terma, yeah, a hidden treasure, yeah. Yeah. So I will say this book. I honestly, I was going to say, if times were different, I would have kind of brought it along and perhaps lent it to somebody. But it's yeah. I mean, it's not so directly relevant to sort of things about Gaia. But this is, and I will say just a word about it. It's an extraordinary Lama who he took a group of 300 people to. He was going to open up Hidden Valley in Sikkim, on the slopes of Mount Kanchenjunga. You've come across it, yeah. And it's an extraordinary story. But you know, he's saying the same thing. Well, because the Tibet's being destroyed. So this is 1962-63 that this happened, and he was saying this the Bayul, the Hidden Valley, the kind of Shangri-La, has to be opened up now because of the devastating, destruction of the Dharma in Tibet and so on. So you know, these things. I won't give away the end of the story or anything, but
it's amazing coincidence. I did mention it to Rowena that I had picked up that book just randomly as my travel companion when my thought was, I'm going to India, I'm going to sort out the business affairs and then go for a retreat to Revolsur.
Yes, one of those coincidences.
That traveled with me to Revolsur, and I was reading the book, and I'd come to the point where the Lama Lingpa, Tulchu Lingpa, he was supposed to have been stationed at the Nyingma monastery where I was staying.
Oh, yeah.
I
One of those
asked many
coincidences,
people.
it's not a coincidence.
He was supposed to have painted one of the murals on the
Oh,
wall.
really?
And I kept asking various people. None of them seemed to know which one, or many of them weren't even aware of
Yeah.
Tulchu Limpa.
Anyway,
But
it's a rip-roaring read.
yeah,
Okay, so we've drifted a bit away from Gaia, but not really. You know, it's all the same thing, isn't it? And yes, fascinating to explore the connections. So Eco Dharma, yes, that's working. And so yeah, I'm going to call this course Eco Dharma, but I'll have to
Eco
again, maybe. Right. So shall we finish with a brief meditation? And
Yeah.
oh, before we do that, I want to ask a question because I did ask this before. Is everybody happy, or would people like, you know, for me to make the discussion parts of the recordings public? Because I haven't done that so far, because I wanted to make sure that nobody had any problem with that. I think it would be, there'd be some value.
I have
Sure.
I've got no problems with
No.
it if it helps other people to, you know, yeah.
absolutely.
Quite interesting, can't it? What reflections people have.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Learn a lot from other people's questions and thoughts.
Okay, well, thank you very much for those contributions. And yeah, let's just.
My friend had joined towards the end of
Yeah.
the meditation, and she has sent her thanks to
Yes.
everyone.
Okay. Right. Thank you. I'll stop the recording and start it again.